here we are in Photoshop, and the first thing we want to do is draw a background that both balls are going to be bouncing in. And that, so I'm going to create this new layer just for the background. And I'm going to start by drawing, the ground, because you don't ever want to use the edge of the paper or the frame as the ground. Things might get cut off. If you're like drawing your balls down here, they might get cut off. So we're going to kind of move up just a little bit and just draw a ground line. And of course, depending on, how much you want to challenge yourself, you can draw stuff in perspective. You can get really creative with your background. If you've never done bouncing balls or animated stuff before, then I would say keep it pretty simple. But if you have, I don't want this to be boring. I want you to learn something. So give yourself a good challenge. So the requirement of the assignment is to have 2 balls that bounce in the same environment. And there should be at least one thing in that environment that they're going to interact with. So the simplest way to approach this would be like, okay, there's going to be a box that these balls might hit and bounce off of or something. So I'm going to draw a box, and here we go. Very basic background layer, all ready to go. So now I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to start drawing my motion guides. So these are going to be the arcs and the timing and spacing that's going to help us plan the animation. So I saw a lot of tennis balls in the tests that you did. And I'd say it's a good idea to, use those tests as reference. So whatever balls you happen to have, you can kind of build off of the observations that you made. So tennis ball, for those of you who were throwing tennis balls around, what were some of the things that you observed when you were tossing? Things like the height of the arc or like how far it traveled.
Mine had longer, narrow arcs for some of them.
Mm-hmm. So like kind of like longer, narrow, high arcs versus like lower, flat ones.
And the arcs slowed down a lot quicker compared to a racquetball I was using.
Okay. When you say slowed down, like you mean lost height or lost?
Yeah, lost height, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. So racquetball was kind of bouncier and maintained its height. Did you happen to notice, like, how much height did it lose? Did it lose like half the height, a third the height? Like, how much height did it lose each time it bounced?
The tennis ball was at least half every bounce.
Uh-huh.
And the racquetball, it was just slightly with every bounce. It wasn't as great as the tennis ball.
Great. Good observations. So with the tennis ball, yeah, I think the most of the observations were like, yeah, it loses about half of its height. And then, of course, how far it travels horizontally really depends on the momentum that it has when it's thrown, right? So if you kind of like just toss it into the air, then it doesn't have a whole lot of horizontal momentum. And so, it might be like losing half of its height, but not really traveling very far. Whereas if you really kind of like give it a good throw, then you're going to have a much flatter arc because it's going to be traveling more this way as it's falling through the air, right? And so you might have, an arc that's like this. It's still going to lose half the height, but it's going to do something like that. So I'm just going to clear that. And then, so let's say we gave it a little bit of like forward momentum when we threw it. And so we start out and our arc kind of coming into the frame is something like this. Probably a little bit more flat there. So if it starts out like that, then the next bounce, we're going to be like, well, it's probably losing about half of its height from energy. So that's going to put it like right around here. And then we're thinking like, okay, well, it came in and it bounced like this much. So it's still traveling pretty fast at that speed. So like if I was going to draw another bounce here, it might look, the shape of the arc is probably going to be pretty similar. So it's probably going to come kind of like up here, go down around there, right? So like if we were just drawing this arc as it goes across the screen, this is probably what it looks like. Now, The problem is there's this box in the way, right? And so the ball is going to run into the box before it starts to come over here. So now, what do you think is going to happen when the ball hits the, like, let's say it's going to hit the box. I mean, it looks like it's going to hit the box right here on the corner, pretty much, based on this. This arc is probably, maybe it needs to be a little bit like that. I can also go to my background and say, actually, since I'm just planning this out, if I wanted to hit the corner, I could kind of refine my box a little bit and say, actually, I do want it to hit the corner right there. So what do you think will happen if the ball comes in with like a fair bit of forward momentum here, and then it just hits this corner of the box? What's going to happen?
It bounce off in the opposite direction or something.
Okay, so bounce off in the opposite direction? Kind of, not quite. Like if the box really hits the corner, I mean, if the ball really hits the corner of the box.
Will it bounce like backwards a little bit?
Yeah, it's going to have that weird thing where it goes ka-ching, right? Because that corner is going to send it into a weird direction. So it might go kind of like, and this would be something that, you know, you could do some observation on and try and like hit the corner of something, but it's basically going to pop. It's going to do one of those pops up. So it kind of pops up. Like all of this forward momentum and energy is getting transferred into the new direction. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. It's going to kind of like pop up, and it doesn't really have any momentum horizontally anymore because that all kind of like got transferred into the upward momentum. So it's just probably going to just sort of go plop like that. And then since it loses about half of its height with each bounce, it's probably going to do something like this. Plop. And then you get like about half. Plop, plop, plop. Whoops, a little bit lower. Something like that. And then, you know, maybe it rolls to a stop. That's one arc. I mean, like, obviously, if the ball comes in and it comes in at a slightly higher angle, you know, like you might get a different effect with it hitting the box, right? So let's see what happens if we do something like this and it loses half the height, and so it's going to kind of have a bounce like this, loses half of its height, so it's going to have more of a bounce like this, and then it comes and it hits the box right here. Like if it hits the box right here, what's going to happen when it next? What angle is it going to come off the box at? Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to go?
It's got sort of the blue one is sort of kind of bounce off the kind of upwards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure in the other direction.
Yeah.
The same angle.
Yeah. So this is that's an important observation, is when it goes up at one particular angle, right? So you have one angle here, it goes off at the same angle. So they're congruent angles, these two angles here. So it's going to kind of pop off, and then it's going to go and do its little bounce, bounce, bounce until it rolls to a stop that way, right? Let me turn this one off. So the way that you draw this first arc, the way that it comes into the frame, is really going to affect how the whole thing plays out, right? It depends how much momentum the ball is carrying horizontally, as well as how high it's going. What comes next? So let's work with this one for now. So if you feel like you have like a pretty good, accurate arc, then the next step is to determine, well, what is the spacing going to be of the ball along that arc? And the way that you start doing that is you have to kind of figure out the timing, right? You have to figure out how long is each one of these bounces going to take. So you can kind of think, well, like, is it like 1 second per bounce, or is it less than 1 second per bounce? Is it like 1,000, 1,001, 1,000? That seems pretty slow. Maybe not too slow, but maybe it's like 1,001, 1,000. You can kind of like, imagine it, picture it in your head. What does a tennis ball look like? Punk, punk, punk. I don't know. Maybe it is a second. From here, it'd be like 1,000. That's a little fast. 1,001. Yeah, it might be like 1,001. All right, well, let's say this happens at 1 second, right? If we are working on twos, that's 12 drawings for 1 second of animation. So this is going to be drawing number 12. 1,001, 1,000. This is probably a little bit less than a second. It's traveling less distance. So this hit might be drawing number 20, something like that, right? So it's just a little bit less than 1 second, another second through. Or maybe it's drawing 22. I'm not entirely sure. We'll just say 20. And so you can kind of like time that out. Actually, I think it's probably closer. Losing a little bit, but not too much each bounce. So 1,000, 2,003. Like it might be like over here, this might be 36 by the time it's kind of coming up and hitting the box. So somewhere in here is like, 32. That seems about right. So this one is, so that's 10 drawings in there. Here's 12 drawings in here. This one's 10 drawings. Then it might be more like 30, so it's like 9 drawings. So you can see I'm sort of just like feeling my way through it intuitively. But you can also use your reference video and you can actually like count the number of frames, right? And you can kind of see how many seconds it is taking for each box. You can get really kind of like precise about it. If you're not feeling comfortable about the whole, just like, what is this counting in your head and that type of stuff. That's why reference is really helpful for animators, is because you can reference it. You can actually count and look at the time code and see how long things are taking. But let's say we've got this timing here. So we have 12 spaces. So it has to move along this arc here in 12 different drawings. And so from here, to here, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Maybe we'll start with this one. Let's start with this middle one. It's a little bit simpler. So we have 10 drawings, and we kind of want to make sure we get something right at the top here. So if this is drawing number 12, then we have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. Okay. So would this be like drawing number 16, where it's here? This is like the hard thinking part, right? And so this is where you kind of have to be like, all right, so if it's going to travel this amount of space, so we have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Oh, this is going to be number 17, isn't it? That makes it a little easier. So we have 13, 14, 15. We got to adjust our spacing a little bit. You want the spacing on the horizontal plane to be pretty even through a bounce, or through like one arc, because it's not really losing any of that energy as it's traveling forward. The only thing acting on it is a little bit of air resistance, unless it's a beach ball. If it's a beach ball, that's going to be different, or a balloon. So we have 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Great. So I've divided up this space evenly. So this is drawing number 12. This is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Sorry, that's getting messy, but that's how that's all working. And then, if we've made the arc correct, what we can do is we can say, well, where's it actually going to hit? It's going to hit here. 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 Here. And here. I think this one is actually over here. Okay, so what you will notice, if this is done correctly, like your arcs are looking correctly, when you kind of do this little crosshair thing, notice that the spacing, the vertical spacing is reflecting that gravitational acceleration and deceleration, right? So it's slower up here at the top, it's dropping at a slower rate, and it's getting faster and faster as it goes down. And then of course when it's going up this side, gravity is acting on it, and so as it gets to the top of the arc, it's getting slower. So that's sort of how you can check your work and make sure that your arcs are fairly accurate. So you would do the same thing for all of the arcs that you have, kind of like feeling out, well, where, what's the how do you divide up the spacing here? Like here, it probably would be pretty simple. So we were doing like, this one's tricky because it's coming in over here. So it's like, actually, if you continued the arc all the way down, it would be, you're probably looking at like 16 or so frames. So there's probably like 8 frames in between here and here. So would that make this number 4? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I wonder if that works out. Let's see. 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Hey, look at that. Gosh, I must be a good animator. I can just sort of like divide up this space in my head. It's always nice when it just works out, you guys. Like, it doesn't, like, sometimes you have to go back and redo this multiple times to just feel it out. So like this is drawing number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? And then from 4, 3, 2, 1. Didn't quite work out exactly, but we can kind of fake that. There's a little bit of flexibility. 4, 3, 2, 1. That's going to be drawing number 0. Anyway. So you would do the same thing here and try and make your positions line up. I feel like this arc maybe needs a little bit of refinement. I think it's a little bit wonkier than it should be. But that is how you do the figure out the spacing of things. The one thing that can be a little bit, that can mess you up, is if you note, so like I have a drawing here, I'm gonna make a new layer here. So let's say I'm drawing my ball and I'm just kind of like lining it up here, and then it's gonna squash here, and then it's going to like come off here, right, in these drawings. When you have 2 drawings on either side of an arc, they're very close together, and there's only one drawing in between, it will give you this little strobing effect when you play it, because it's hard for our eye to make that connection. And so you could either, if you wanted to, switch to 1s at one of these parts, but you can also sort of just fake it a little bit by offsetting the position of that first frame on one of these, so it's a little bit closer. It sort of cheats a little bit, so they're not just like exactly symmetrical. That will help. If you offset it so that the spacing is bigger on going into the bounce, and then it's shorter coming out, that's going to make your ball look a little bit sticky or squelchy, like it's going to kind of like squelch onto the floor because these 2 frames are closer together. If you do it the other way, and Richard Williams talks about this in his book, right, if you recall, to where you kind of like fake it a little bit on this side, so the ball is really close here, and then it's sort of like maybe up here. Then you'll get more of a spring jump, kind of as it comes off the ground. It'll feel like it sort of like pops off the ground. So they give you slightly different effects. They can both work. It sort of depends on the ball and like what effect you're going for. So
is it better?
You go ahead.
Is it better to draw in between that frame just to make it more fluid, or?
like go onto ones for that frame?
Yeah,
You-
on the instance that it's bouncing, so it could look more realistic.
I mean, I don't think that would necessarily solve the problem if your in-betweens were still, if you drew the ball here and then you drew the ball here to have a straight in-between, and then you drew the ball here and you drew the ball here, you would actually have the same problem with these two frames, because it's sort of like dun dun dun, like that. It would perhaps give you enough information, because it's on ones, like maybe we would see the arc a little bit better. But if you can just offset it a little bit, then that will be that will just eliminate that problem. Okay, so I want to show you just one more like kind of best practice thing. So I'm actually going to set up the actual animation frame by frame thing here, so I can use actual frames. And we're at 24 frames per second, so I'm going to animate on 2s here. And I'm going to go to my guide layer. Oh, bad me. I need to be labeling, guide 1. Very important to label. Here we go. This is guide 2. Just like that. Okay, so I'm on my guide layer, and I'm going to draw myself a template for the ball, just over here in the corner. I think I'll just do that here. It's a tennis ball, so it's kind of small. And this is going to help me keep the size consistent, and also hopefully make my animation process a little more efficient. So what I can do then is, instead of having to like draw the ball and then figure out how to keep the size consistent every single frame, I can do this. I can go like this and trace from this part here, and then I can kind of put it into position here where I want it to go. And then for the next frame, I can add 2 frames, turn on my onion skinning so I can see where that's going. And if you're always tracing from the template, then you don't have this kind of weird problem that happens where things start to slowly shrink or things start to slowly grow because of the way that you just naturally, like the drawing kind of evolves if you don't have a constant to kind of refer back to. And so this just, so with this guide, this is what, so at this point you can see I'm going pretty fast, right? I just add my frames and I kind of use my template to help me make sure I'm getting things the right size. And this is particularly helpful when you get to the squash and stretch. So like, for example, if I was going to do a squash frame, I have this volume reference here to make sure that I keep the volume consistent, and I can kind of like put this, here. Obviously, this is not the right frame. I have a lot more to do, but that is how that, you can kind of move through things pretty quickly that way. And also, I mean, like, some people are just like, yeah, no, I totally got this. I can kind of like eyeball it. But it does take practice to have consistent drawings. It takes a lot of practice. So it is, use anything that will make your life easier. Here's number 8. I did not finish my guide, so now I'm sort of lost. This is why the guide is important. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to put this ball now, so now I have to actually like do some real thinking. The 9 should go right here. Getting faster as we drop. Number 10 is here. I'm going to leave a little bit of room so I can kind of fake that. And this is where we're getting a little bit of motion blur because it's moving fast. So I'm going to stretch out the ball, and then we've got our squash frame here. You can see, like, I think actually just doing it on my own, I started shrinking a little bit. It's getting a little bit smaller. So that's why the template is helpful. Okay? You all ready to get started?